Almost 1.5 years ago, Fallout 76 was released. And if you recall, I made some videos about the game back then and I was not very happy with the state of it at all. Like most people really. Now Bethesda has released a major update for the game, Fallout 76 Wastelanders, and they have also brought the game to Steam. Free for those who actually had an account on the Bethesda net before and had the game there. So that was a nice bonus. And as I was getting swamped with ads for the game on YouTube anyways, I figured, you know what, might as well give it a try. If they're so confident in their product now, then maybe it is actually improved somewhat. I didn't have any expectations going into that. I already owned the game, I knew how it was at the start, and I figured, let's just see if it's maybe more worth playing now. Therefore, I tested the update on the character that I already had. I also tested it on a new character to see how the experience is there. And I also tested out the PvP mode that now came out quite a while ago. We're discussing the new update as well as other changes that came since the game came out, and I'll talk about the pros and the cons. We begin with the pros. The story updates are most definitely nice. The whole world feels a lot more alive and there is a lot to explore in the game now that wasn't there before. And it's cool how the characters acknowledge certain things about you as well. For example, they will acknowledge what kind of gear you're wearing or what kind of skill you have. I'm not entirely sure what that's based on. But either way, the world in itself is more interactive, even outside of the storylines. The story itself ties together nicely with the already existing story. And that's the case no matter if you're starting a new character or if you're continuing the existing character that you already have. There are certain bridges between the normal quests or the old quests and the new quests and everything, and that's set up very nicely. If you use a character that you've already played for a while, you actually get some extra dialogue options as well, where you can basically refer back to events that you learned about in the game, which is cool, but at the same time can be a bit annoying if you haven't played the game in a long time and you've kind of forgotten what that was all about, and they don't really give a full-on reminder of what the story part actually refers to. There's a large number of extra quests all throughout the world, so it's definitely filled with a good amount of content. It seems there are roughly 10 hours of extra story, give or take, depending on how quickly you want to rush through it, and then some extra grind along with that as well. That, for a free update, is most certainly technically good. Much like in older games, you also get to use your special points in order to have extra dialogue options that, for example, allow you to intimidate someone and therefore skip another extra part of the quest. And to make the world even more lively, companions have been introduced as well. These will not follow you, but they will stay at your camp and offer certain things there. There are also quite a few quality of life upgrades that the game has received since its start. For example, you have a larger storage box than back then, higher building budget for your camp. Tapes that you pick up don't autoplay, you select that you want to play them by holding the button. And if a plan is known to you, then it will show as known. So really neat quality of life improvements there. Nothing super major though. But as I said, the list of pros is unfortunately short, and this already brings us to the cons. The first one's being performance related. The game still has horrible performance issues even so long after its release. I actually had to monitor my system just to make sure it's not something on my end, and I can tell you that Fallout 76 simply doesn't utilize CPUs and GPUs properly. I saw that neither of them was under a heavy burden, and still I had jittering and stuttering in the game, and I thought maybe it's just my PC, maybe it's a weird setup, but my girlfriend on her PC had very similar issues. It's just not performing like a game should be performing in 2020. It's just very, very sad that that is not something that they've been focusing on earlier. And you can kind of fix up a fair bit of that through various tweaks in the INI settings, through various mods, through adjusting the game in ways that turn off certain settings, but it's a lot more complicated than it should be. On the default settings, on multiple systems, we experienced multiple crashes as well in different situations. In one situation, this was a crash right after creating the character, which took long enough, going through all the visual settings for that, and the character was simply deleted afterwards. I don't know at what point the character is first saved, maybe when you pick up the Pip-Boy, but I made the foolish mistake of, after setting up my character, to switch into the graphical settings and change something around and turn off the game, restart it. in order to get those settings activated, and then my character was deleted as well. I don't know how that's something that isn't fixed by now. Mouse inputs are super sluggish for some reason as well. In the main menu, it lags behind. If you go into the in-game settings and the special perks, then you will also feel this very sluggish mouse. It's really, really weird. And some settings that should really be available for everyone are still hidden. For example, you can't turn off VSync or motion blur without doing intensive research on how exactly to do that. That's just not acceptable for a game that came out so long ago. They have made some tweaks, like for example allowing you to change your field of vision, but since then they barely adjusted anything about the settings menu, and it still feels very much like a terrible console port. I've heard this experience is better when playing on console, and I guess if you heavily mod your PC version you might get ways around it, but it's just not something that should perform this poorly out of the box, especially when it's not even a very taxing game where you usually only have a few players around you. When it comes to the story, there are also issues. The storytelling when playing this as a multiplayer game is just awkward at times. It's just that one may click another dialogue option than the other, and both have completely separated dialogues with each character, with different outcomes potentially, and it just makes it very much feel like this was not intended to be played as a multiplayer. There are games that work well with storytelling as multiplayer games, and those are not many, but with this slapped on storytelling that we have in Fallout 76 Wastelanders, it doesn't work well for a multiplayer format. This gets even worse because you have split progression depending on your perks. If you build into different special points from your teammate, then they may end up with a different special check at some point where they can intimidate someone and you can't, and then suddenly you have a different quest. For a while at least, you have to pick something up and they could just go to the next point, and that's just obnoxious. And I don't know why there's not some kind of shared dialogue option that would allow your teammate to use their perks and you to use your own perks, because it's especially stupid when you're building two different characters to have synergy. So if one of you is playing a melee character and the other one is playing a sniper, then you will have very different perks, and that results directly in different outcomes of the story parts, which just feels bad when you're trying to play together. Multiplayer also takes away another important aspect of single-player role-playing games, and that is that you can't save at any point, and then if you don't like the outcome of a choice, you can reset it. I know some people like to play like this, I know some people don't like to play like this, but it just is more restrictive in the multiplayer that you can only play this one way because there's no way to go back. Likewise, because it's multiplayer, you can't just choose to kill off every NPC. That is something we, for example, saw in The Outer Worlds, where you can technically go through the game doing that, but in Fallout 76 it won't work because somebody else might need that NPC, and most of them are simply immune to damage. That generally makes the game feel a fair bit more inconsequential overall, and it would be nice to have that choice to see what impact it would have on the world. And that brings us to the next aspect, usability. The game still feels like a terrible port in that regard when it comes to PC. The key bindings are still terrible after a year, and you still cannot change some of them. So when building in the camp, the bindings are still C and Z for switching through tabs, and if you're using a keyboard that's not the standard English keyboard, then that can be very annoying because they may be located elsewhere on your keyboard. I don't know how they haven't made any options to change those bindings yet, but it essentially means that you kind of have to play certain aspects of the game with the controller unless you're going to end up super frustrated. There's still a general lack of input and usability improvements in other ways as well. For example, in some situations, tab is the one you use to tab out of menus. In other situations, when you use escape. Then to get to the settings, you have to press escape and then Z. I don't know who makes up these bindings, but really, it's not up to standards for 2020 at all. And that also goes for every other menu, for the loot menu and everything. I get the nostalgia aspect of it, but it's just not comfortable to use when going through your items and looking for something specific. There are mods to fix that, but there's still no official okay for mods. There was some weird justification that they made an engine switch to the client server model, and that apparently has something to do with it. Whatever, I don't know. But You can use quite a few mods technically, and they exist, and they greatly improve the game experience, but there's no official statement on them or anything like that. They only really issued an indirect statement. And that is by specifically forbidding mods for the PvP mode, because they acknowledge that having a better inventory management system would give you an advantage there. Kind of sad that that's how low we have to stoop here, but that's how it is. That way they essentially implied that mods are at least somewhat allowed for the normal mode. There could be a lot of simple additions that could make the game so much more comfortable to play, like sorting options for the inventory, total carry weight for items, categories for the items, marking loot as trash so it gets sold or scrapped, detailed health bars. You could go on. There are plenty of mods that exist that tell them exactly what they would need to introduce to the game. This even goes as far as restricting certain playstyles, especially if you're playing on console, where the mods are not necessarily available. For example, the Power Armor in-game HUD is so obnoxious that both my girlfriend and I don't want to play Power Armor builds, just because of that HUD that comes with it. And there are mods that take that HUD away and make Power Armor a lot more bearable, but those things should really be a default and not a mod. The game also has a strange amount of time wasters. You have long animations when going into menus, when going to build something. You have long loading times when traveling around, even if you have an SSD. You have those survival mechanics that don't really feel like they are ever putting you at risk of anything, but make things very annoying because you carry a lot of weight in food and the consumption that's higher now. So it just feels lackluster in that regard. Combat is still far from impressive and logical, in my opinion. Sometimes you get high-level, high-ranking enemies that you can kill in 2 shots, and at other times you have super tanky enemies that take forever and both give you almost the same amount of XP. Super weird. And of course, there's the whole issue of Fallout First existing, subscription model for way too much money for, I think it's $13 or 23 Australian dollars. I don't know who did that conversion rate, but that's even more. And that offers private servers, which were meant to be a feature originally, and gives you gameplay or playability advantages that make things more convenient, like a second fast travel and unlimited storage. I don't see how this is something that should be paywalled. I also gave the PvP mode a spin, and I gotta say that in comparison to this, the main mode actually feels smooth. This game was so incredibly laggy. I'm not sure if it placed me on different region servers, if they don't have Australian servers anymore. They used to have them at least, but maybe there's not enough players that play them all, so they placed them on US servers, but it was choppy all the way throughout. It had some interesting mechanics, like nuking zones and a mix of PvE and PvP, but I could barely experience anything of it based on how it felt. It also seems like there's some advantage by getting higher levels in this mode, so playing it more makes you better stat-wise through the perks, which I also found a bit questionable, but I can't say that for sure. I could not bear to touch that more than once. And that brings us to the conclusion. Do I think Fallout 76 is worth buying now for the full price? No, absolutely not. It's not worth its price by far, and they still have a lot of work to do to make this anywhere near a reasonable product. Would I say it's worth buying it in a Steam sale for, say, $10 at some point? Maybe. If you want to play a Fallout game purely for the story, and you are not planning to play it with friends and want to have a single player experience, then I think you can play Fallout 76 at that point for a very low price point. If you want a multiplayer experience, don't even bother. This game is not a multiplayer game that feels in any way substantial in its multiplayer aspect. The multiplayer is just slapped on in a bad way. And if you play it in single player, download somebody else's tested settings and download some mods that make the game feel better and don't give you this super annoying, frustrating experience with all the menus and all the lag and everything. I think Bethesda actually made a terrible move here in general, because they did things in the wrong order. They updated the game with a lot of new content without fixing all the bugs and other outstanding performance issues that the game had. The experience and storytelling of the game is heavily hindered by how awful it feels to play the game. If it felt better running through this open world, then the experience would automatically be way, way better. But it doesn't. It feels so bad that after a few hours I want to turn off the game because I'm getting a headache from it, even if I get more invested into the story. And I find it a bit absurd that Bethesda has a budget to advertise all over YouTube. They have so many ads running at the moment. They have the money, and they invest it all into advertising, but nothing into improving this product. And now you can say, well, they just want to get more customers. But the problem is those customers aren't going to stay, and the long-term customers, the whales, are the ones where you get the money from when it comes to these kinds of game formats. This was probably some shareholder decision from people who have never in their life touched games and have never played the game and just said, okay, we need to push this now, we need to market this now, or whatever. Or some higher ups simply decided to allocate this high marketing budget but nothing into actually fixing the game. So the nice news story aside, I consider that a very poor approach that should not be supported, and they should really get their things in order in their company and figure out where their priorities lie. Because even if your only priority is money, you will get more of that if you actually make people stay in your game and invest into it. And that's it for today. If you're new to the channel, click the sub button and maybe the bell if you want to hear me rambling about other video games in the future. And on that, see you for the next one soon. Duke Sloth, out.